quality, more people, etc., is how to learn. So we talk all the time about learning a new skill, learning how to do this, learning how to do line art, etc., but we never really talk about learning how to learn. How do I learn to do something the correct way, right? So if I'm sitting there right now, how, like, can I sit down and be introspective about how I learn stuff? A lot of people cannot say that. A lot of people go, well, I just learn, but like they can't really tell you what that means to them. They can't tell you how they best learn. They can't tell you what it means to learn. They can just say, well, yeah, I can sit in a classroom or whatever and I can learn this or whatever, which is fine. You don't always need to know. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with not knowing how you learn, because I think, you know what I mean, it's easy to. Oh, I don't really know how I learn. Like, that's fine. But at the same time, I think it's important to, because I think it helps then create autonomy, but also allow you to take stuff in quicker. So let's say drawing, for an example, since obviously I'm a drawer, what have you. Let's talk about like the difference between learning something and knowing how to learn. So if I just erase this that I've been doing, kind of just for practice and to keep me mentally stable while I'm just kind of talking. Give me a sec. Holy, I'm all out of whack. So if we sit here and we go, what goes into learning how to learn, and then we apply that to drawing, we get some very specific things. So first, actually I don't even need this. Let's just do a notepad. Notepad will make this easy for us, because then I can actually just like type instead of like doing really bad drawing that I don't think helps anyone, because only I can really read my handwriting because it's atrocious. So like we'll do this different. So learning how to learn, and then learning how to learn in relation to drawing. So we have like some distinct kind of things here that we'll talk about in terms of like, what's the difference, what does it mean, like what am I even talking about, right? Because I think it's important. So first we'll talk about learning, right? So what goes into learning? Well, I mean, obviously it's acquiring knowledge. You know what I mean? It's taking in knowledge. Somehow it's typically applying knowledge to different situations. So in terms of learning, you're like, oh, well, I take this knowledge that I learned and now I apply it to this thing. So when I think of that, I think of like mathematical formulas is often what I think about when I think about applying knowledge to different situations. Learning can also just be listening. It can be applying. It can be receiving. I think these are fundamental things about learning, right? You acquire knowledge, you learn to apply that knowledge to different situations, you listen, you apply, you receive. These are like the basic fundamentals of learning. And there's a ton more that I'll add whenever I do this video or whatever. So now, what about learning how to learn? How is this right here different from just learning? Well, learning how to learn takes a couple things. So what kind of learner are you? Is a fundamental question. Are you a visual? Are you possibly a kinetic, or what oftentimes would be like hands-on? Are you a just listening learner? Do you just need to listen to learn things, right? So first you need to figure out what kind of learner are you. Next you need to figure out what are your barriers with whatever you're learning. So what if you have a disability? That's true. People have ADHD all the time, what have you. You know what I mean? I myself have OCD, or at least a certain aspect of OCD in terms of planning and stuff like that. And some people can tell it very clearly from how I talk. I talk in a very rhythmic, organized way, even when I'm talking impromptu, because my brain doesn't really let me think of things without having a massive plan or talking about it in my head like 10 times before I say it. So, you know what I mean? You could have a disability that kind of can impair, but isn't always going to impair. So for me, obviously, my OCD doesn't always impair my learning. For other people, it can, you know? For other people, their disability can be a hindrance on their learning. And for other people, it can actually help their learning. Disabilities come in all sizes, and obviously, there's a lot of nuance with disability discussions. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of nuance of, like, we probably shouldn't hyper focus on them, because it's not, for example, it's not you wouldn't say my brother is autistic. You would say my brother who is a person who has autism, or my brother who has autism, because you want to reaffirm his humanity and his autonomy before the autism, because the autism doesn't define him as a person is what defines him. And that's a whole nuanced discussion that really just needs a whole lot of unpacking that this probably isn't the best form for. However, yeah, for sure. So it's a discussion that, like, at some point I'll talk about, but I don't think this is the right form. So anyhow, so yeah, what are your barriers? So you might have a disability. You might just not understand the content. You might lack in some areas. So you might be really good at math, but once it comes to applying that math, it's hard. Or you might be good at math, but once you start adding arithmetic, once you start adding algebra, you know, you start adding letters, you start adding moles if you're in chemistry or whatever, it can be really confusing for you. And then finally, like, what do you not learn well with? So, for example, when that's going back up to, so this one right here is going back up to here. What do you not learn well with? Like, not a visual learner. Maybe visuals do nothing for you. Maybe what, you know what I mean? Maybe visual is not how you learn best. Maybe kinetic, hands-on approaches really don't help you understand the content. There's a million things that can go into that. So, you know, maybe they just don't fit you. And that's okay. They don't have to. Understanding these barriers is important because then it helps you understand where you need to focus on. So as I said, as someone who, adding one here, and this is more specific to me, but obviously everyone can deal with it, mental health stuff. So depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, I mean, the list goes on, right? So like, for example, I have depression and bipolar, and so that impacts how I learn. So oftentimes I think of, and these don't have to be negatives. So this is a barrier sometimes because, you know, I talked about burnout a little bit earlier. Well, sometimes my burnout is caused by a bipolar episode. Sometimes I'm feeling super manic, so I'm having a manic episode and I want to go run at like midnight rather than getting sleep, and therefore my learning the next day sucks. You know, sometimes I'm having depressive episodes and I don't want to go to class. That can be a barrier to learning. And so understanding that reality can help you better understand it when it happens. So then the next thing that you need to understand, once you've got what kind of learner you are and what your barriers are to learning, is what helps you learn. So this isn't what kind of learner you are. This is what's the positive. What are the things that are going to elevate you? So maybe you're really good at abstract concepts. Maybe you're really good at experimentation. Maybe you're really good at memorization. So these kind of things are important. What helps you learn? It can help you understand, because this then can cause, let's say you're really good at memorization. So then maybe flashcards are best for you, right? If you're good at experimentation, maybe, so let's say we'll go down here real fast actually. So let's say you're learning a language, right? So we'll say we're learning a language, right? So if you're the top one, you might say, I'm really good at abstract concepts. So you might be really good at things like grammar, sentence structure, etc. So you might learn best by having someone explain it. So by having someone sit there and explain to you how grammar works. It's an abstract concept. You can't hold grammar, and it's something you apply to language. So maybe that's how you learn best. Now, like experimentation. Let's say you're learning a language. Maybe if you're really good at experimentation, direct speaking is going to be the way you learn best. So I know for me, I'm really good at experimentation, and it helps me a lot. So for example, I know Japanese, Mandarin, and I'm learning Spanish now. And so what I've started doing is I have a friend who is also who also speaks Spanish, and so I talk to her in Spanish all the time. It's that direct speaking, because it allows me to experiment, and therefore I can practice. Language is a tool. It's something that we change. So how can I get my point across even if I don't know exactly what to say, even if I don't understand the grammar? So if you're good at experimentation, memorization might be how you learn best, and it might be what you need to learn. Whereas if you're good at memorization, the old-fashioned flashcard might be best. You know what I mean? If you're good at memorization, if you can remember vocab and grammar rules, if you just put your mind to it, just do flashcards. But do you see then how this is so important? Why this list right here is so important? Going back to what kind of learner are you? So again, let's say we're learning a language, right? Okay, well, if I'm a visual learner, videos, etc. are going to be helpful to me. So videos are going to be helpful to me. Lectures are going to be helpful if there's like a PowerPoint associated, stuff like that. Well, let's say I'm a kinetic learner. I'm a hands-on learner. So flashcards might be helpful, puzzles, etc. So anything that's hands-on. So there's games that can be hands-on that involve Spanish speaking. There's puzzles that involve Spanish speaking. There's a million things you can do to involve hands-on approach, but flashcards would be a more direct one. And then learning language, if you're good at listening, maybe music, maybe audiobooks. Maybe that's what you need. And then kind of going back here onto kinetic, maybe like games, right? What if you play a video game? So for example, I play League of Legends, and I can actually pull it up right here. I have my client in Spanish because that's how I learn a little bit, is by immersing myself in it. So this is almost like a kinetic kind of. I'm working with it. I have to, when I'm playing a game, if I'm looking at an item or something, I have to read the item, right? If I'm going here and I'm looking at this, I need to read this to understand what this does. And so therefore I'm applying it in a meaningful way. And again, with listening, well, music is helpful, right? Maybe just listening to an audiobook, listening to a lecture can help you. And then same thing with barriers, right? If you have a disability, how can you best learn it? That might be with medication. You might not need to take anything for your disability. For your mental health, do you need to take Zoloft for your depression? Do you not need to? Do you need to understand when to take breaks, when not to? If you just don't understand the content, what can you do? Can you do extra learning, stuff like that? What do I not learn well with? Well, if I'm not a visual learner, well then videos aren't going to help me. So why don't I focus more on these two? So do you see kind of how these things, these questions that we're asking here are super important because they help you understand how to go about your learning. And this is true with everything. But the issue is oftentimes we don't think about it, right? We go into it like this. We think, oh, well, it's receiving knowledge, it's applying, it's acquiring knowledge, it's using it in different situations. But we don't think about it like this. What are your barriers? What helps you learn? What kind of learner are you? A really good one that we often don't think about, what incentives or what motivation do you have? So for example, is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? So intrinsic here would be personally wanting to learn. Extrinsic here would be learning to achieve something that is beyond the self or beyond self. So intrinsic would be like what I'm doing with drawing, right? I'm learning how to draw not for any extrinsic reason. It started with me wanting to learn how to draw because I genuinely found a passion for it. It was fun, it's interesting, it's unique, it's something that I wanted to learn. And so therefore, my motivation is intrinsic. Now let's say I needed to learn how to draw for my job. That would be extrinsic. I need to learn to do this for this, whether it be to make money, whether it be for this. It's not for me, it's for an extrinsic goal. Well then, this can help you in terms of learning as well. So if your goal is intrinsic, that's all, then you can work off your motivation with yourself. Have you ever sat there in a lecture and thought to yourself, why am I learning this? Why do I care, right? And you couldn't find the reason. You sat there and you said, why do I care about this? But you can't really think about it. Well, if you sit there and say, what's my motivation? If it's college, your motivation is probably extrinsic, right? You're learning to get a job, whatever. So then you sit in that classroom and you think, why am I learning this? And you instantly understand your motivation is extrinsic. So you say, okay, I'm learning this because it's going to apply to my job down the future. It might not seem like it does, but even if I never use it, it helps me get that degree that so many people are looking for. Whereas if it's intrinsic, if you're in a drama class because you want to learn to do drama and act, but you don't really care about why, you just want to learn, then you can sit in drama class, and when that thought pops in your head of why am I doing this, you can say, oh yeah, it's because I genuinely wanted to learn how to do drama because I think it's cool. I want to learn how to act. And this can help a lot. Because so many times you might just stop learning something purely because you can't think of why you're doing it. I've had that before where I was learning something and I straight stopped. And why did I stop? Because when I thought about it, I didn't know why I was doing it. I tried to pick up fencing, and at first fencing was sick, but I didn't think about it as an intrinsic goal. So when it came time to, I was at practice and I was tired and I was beat up and I was like, ugh, this is exhausting. I didn't think about it in terms of, oh, I'm here because I genuinely think fencing is cool. I just thought, why am I doing fencing? So this part's really important because it can help you continue to stay in the game. It can continue pushing you forward in terms of, why am I doing this thing? You know what I mean? Why am I learning this? Why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this pressure? Whatever. It's important. It's hard, and it's obviously not easy, and no one should expect you to always know it, but to always think about it is important. The same way that I would say any of these are important. You know what I mean? I think learning, like, knowing what your barriers are is super important because it helps you later on. So then if we keep going down this line, I can even throw some more in. So like, we've got, what kind of learner are you? What are your barriers? What helps you learn? What motivation do you have? What support do you need? So some of us need instant gratification. Some of us need results. Some of us don't need anything. And these really go into, what do you need to keep going when it gets hard? So for example, if you're learning a video game, oftentimes the support you get is that instant gratification. You're instantly playing the game. You're instantly involved in the action. When you're in school, it's often not instant gratification because you have to sit through lectures and then you have to take the exam and then you get the support. And that would be results. So classroom, so this would be more like a video game, right? You get instant gratification by playing it, you get that stimulus that you want, and you can even get results later. But it's mainly that instant gratification. Gacha games are very common for this, right? Oh, I got my favorite character in this Fire Emblem gacha game or whatever. Results is more school-based. So this is your exams, right? So you sit there and you're like, what support do I need to continue to be in this class? I'm kind of bored of it, not feeling it very much. Oh my gosh, I just got an A on this test. Okay, well, I'm going to keep doing it, right? I'm going to stay in the class because I got the results. Maybe you don't need any marker, and this could be anything, right? Maybe you don't need the good grade. Maybe you're just learning to learn. And this is most often with intrinsic motivation. It's not always. So if you have intrinsic motivation, you might still need instant gratification. You might still need results. You might still need, I'll add reassurance. Not always is intrinsic motivation going to lead to not needing any marker of support, nor is extrinsic motivation never going to lead to it. It's a sliding scale. It depends on everyone, but most often you're going to find this with intrinsic motivation. You're doing something because you find it fun. Therefore, you don't need anything to reaffirm that fun to you. You're just playing it. Video games are, again, a very often thing of this. You don't need any marker. People that play Call of Duty just to play normals and they don't care about anything else. They don't care about their level or their skill. They just want to play. They don't need a marker. They're just having fun. It's something that they enjoy. They want to play the game because they're enjoying it. And that would be slightly different from learning because they're learning passively rather than actively. However, and then reassurance. So maybe you need someone to pick you up, right? So this happens a lot, right? And this happens all the time. It might happen with pro players in a video game. It can happen in school. Sometimes you need that person to say, hey, I need your help, right? Or hey, how do I do this? Or whatever. Sometimes you just need that gratification, or you need that shove from a friend. You need that friend to tell you, hey, it's okay, you're doing fine, right? Not all the time. Obviously, that's not always the case. Obviously, there's times where a friend telling you something honestly just kind of makes you feel worse. But sometimes it makes you feel better, right? Sometimes you sit there and your friend tells you, you can do it, you got this, and guess what? You feel instantly better. And so sometimes that reassurance is all you need. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's a culmination of these two. And that goes with everything. All of these can be in combination. Maybe you're really good at abstract concepts and experimentation. Well, then you can do both these things. Maybe you have both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Well, cool. Then you have to think personally which one is going to help you in the moment. Alright? Ooh, what support do you need? Maybe you need that results, but you also need reassurance. You need someone to pick you up while you try to get those results. This is so common in like professional video games, right? oh, you're playing a video game. You need that results. You need to see that you're improving at the video game. But sometimes you need that community support of people saying, no, you got this, man. You can do it. And so it's a sliding scale. And this isn't even all of it. There's so much more to know how you learn, right? So techniques, right? So learning the techniques, right? Or I don't even want to say techniques here. More learning to learn it. And that sounds really reductive, or repetitive rather, but it's true. So if I watch a YouTube video, for me, when I watch a YouTube video about drawing, I don't watch what they're saying. I don't listen to what they're saying unless I need like context. Instead, I'm watching what they're doing. So when you look at so for example, deconstructing. So let's take, so for example, let's go to some, and I want to go on Twitter for this because I want to be able to actually, like, you know, say who the artists are because they do fantastic work, and so therefore they deserve to be recognized for it. So trying to find a really good one. You know what? We'll go with this one. So this is an artist who specializes in fantasy genres. So let's look at this image right here. So let me pull them up. Sick. So this person right here. So they're Serade art, right? I might be saying that wrong, but that's, you know what I mean. You can see the app. I highly recommend this artist. They're actually really sick. Just look how sick this art is. It's fucking phenomenal. Absolutely beautiful art. So when I look at this, while I'm taking it in, I'm also trying to deconstruct it. So let's look at this one because it's much closer and it's a little easier to see everything. So I might look at this and say, what goes into this piece? So I'm going to deconstruct it from a purely makeup perspective. So what goes into this picture? So you've got the dragon in the back and you got one up front and you have their owner, right? You can see some background in the back, but it doesn't really matter. That just kind of adds to the wholeness of the picture. So you can already tell the main focus of the picture partially is this character. They're almost center frame. They're the clearest of them in terms of wholeness, and you just get a feeling of power from this, right? You can tell that, and you can, again, deconstructing what the picture is itself. It's a person who has themselves tied to the dragon from a harness. So who could this possibly be? Well, it's probably a dragon tamer or someone of that sort, right? So then you look at that and you say, well, let's deconstruct what goes into that, right? So like I said, you have the dragons and you have the one in the back to make it clear what this one is. So you have this one here, which you can already assume is a dragon, but then you look behind you and you can instantly know it's a dragon, right? You see the exact same shape. It's the exact same. The eye is the same. The curve here is the same. It's the same dragon. You know what I mean? And so you instantly know without forcing this to take up the entire image. You use this background to make it clear what this character is on. Then you add these aspects. You had the chains here, you have the rope here, and you have her stance, right? Look how this character is like standing. You know what I mean? They're crouched down, they're holding on the top. The animal looks really relaxed. It's looking forward, not up, which means that it knows that this character is here, but it doesn't care. All of this makes it painfully clear that this is a dragon tamer or someone that has to do with dragons. And that's how you deconstruct a picture. it's, you look at this on your own and you say, this is a really cool picture, right? I love the dragon in the background, I love the character, whatever. But deconstructing it is how we come to understand the choices. So if I'm making notes for my own drawing, I'm saying, okay, don't be afraid for the background to be the explanation, right? If you tone it down, look how like white this dragon is, right? It's very clear they're in the clouds right now, and so this artist uses that to their advantage, because this dragon is now like much whiter than this very crisp coloring up here. It makes it so it's not the focus of the piece. Now you can look at this part right here and truly enjoy it for what it is, but you still get the explanation of what this animal is with this. So this is a perfect drawing to illustrate that, right? And deconstructing it can help your own art, like I said. So I could look at this and I could say, okay, so I can use the background for explanation. My focus does not need to be in the middle. You can create a focus in a picture through more than just putting them in the center of the frame. You can do it by varying contrast. Again, the dragon's very white. She is very, you know what I mean? The dragon looks like he's in the clouds. Her colors are crisp. Look just at the detail here. You know what I mean? It's very crisp. It's obvious. This is a background. It's cloudy. Like this dragon doesn't look like that, and it's intentional. This is foreground, this is background. It's very clear. But then you don't want this to take up this much space, because then the dragon becomes the focus. So how do you fix that? You put the dragon down here and you have her on top of it. So now this character, now you look at this character and you go, that's sick, right? You look at this character, you're like, this is insane. You know she's on a dragon because you can see the exact same creature in the background. And this dragon isn't taking up too much, so you can enjoy how beautiful this dragon looks while also just taking in how beautiful this character design is. It's so rich. And so that's just one example of deconstructing. We can go to the next one, right? Okay, look at this kind of picture. What goes into a picture like this? How are they illustrating what they want to illustrate? Well, you can tell it's a warrior. You can tell from the armor. From the type of armor, you can probably assume that it's more of taking from Asian culture, right? You can just kind of tell from the armor. Gives off a very samurai type of vibe. When you look at the hat there, or what I assume is the hat, could easily be a shield or something. It kind of just gives you that presence of Asian culture. You've got this really nice hair dangling in the back with a feather. Then you look at the mask here, right? So how's the mask look, right? And then you look here and you see this subtle detail, which if you don't look at very closely, you might not notice. And again, this illustrates more of that warrior vibe, but also that like this person just got out of a situation. The blood is still dripping from the sword. They've got blood all over their chest. Their mask is covered in blood. Like they just had a mission of some kind, probably. And then you go back to it and you look at the ground and you say, okay, well, this is only part of the ground. And that could be intentional, or it could just be because they didn't really care about the background. They just wanted to create a frame of reference for the character. Either way, you can take from this picture how subtlety can be important to implying decisions. This blood right here is important because it gives this feeling of power. This person just got out of a fight and he's not even touched, right? He doesn't look in pain. His character looks fine. So again, next one. If you look at this, right? Same difference. Like, what are we looking at? Okay, well, we see, I mean, this is more of a background, so you get more subtleties here, right? Well, if we deconstruct this, how do these shapes come into play? You could spend hours looking at any of these pictures and studying anything. And then the last one of these four, because I think it's beautiful, is this one. So again, this one. How does foreshortening work? How do they implement foreshortening in a good way? Same thing with this one. How does perspective look? How does the camera being here influence the trees above you? For this one, how do you create a perspective where you're slightly looking down on the character while also conveying the power that they have? And then for this one, how do you use the entire background to help illustrate the power of this character? I mean, it's beautiful. And that's what deconstructing means, right? That's how you deconstruct something. You deconstruct something by looking at it, looking at its parts and saying, okay, what goes into this, right? So, I mean, in terms of drawing, deconstructing is taking a finished product and breaking down its parts. You know what I mean? So you look at something and you go, okay, well, what's going into this and how can I replicate it? And that's what I do a lot. So a perfect example that I use a lot, that I've started to use a lot, is basic anime. So I've said before how I want my style to be more of an animated, almost fan art kind of style, like whatever. You know what I mean? It's gonna obviously change throughout time, and I'm not too worried about. I'm just trying to find something that makes me happy now. But for example, let me find a good picture that helps here. Taking a picture like this, right? So we take this picture, right? You could take this picture and you could say, what goes into this? Okay, so you can say, look at the eyes here, right? So like the eyebrows kind of cut over the hair, right? This hair should go like this, but instead of showing the rest of the hair, they care more about the eyes to convey like that wholeness of the face, right? Look at the nose. Look how oddly spaced it is, but it still makes a lot of sense in this context. This nose is right under the left eye, yet for some reason it creates this feeling that it's like still there. Look how empty the space is right here, but you still don't really feel it, right? But that's because the eye is like this. If you cut the eye, right, if you took this picture and you put the bangs over her eyes, this picture probably wouldn't look as good as it does, because there would be less cover of the face, because the eyes would be cut off, and so then it would bring more vision and more focus on the nose here, and you'd be like, whoa, what is all this nonsense? But without it, you look at this and you go, yep, looks good. Mouth, super simple mouth, right? And then you even look here, like this looks odd. Like I look at this and like this is a very odd shape here. But then you go, okay, well, let me look at perspective, right? Well, she's turning towards me, and so she might just have high cheekbones. But again, then you cut off, you have the bangs here, so you don't really see this on this side. So it doesn't matter, right? You see this and you go, oh, that's just how her face is going to look on both sides. It doesn't matter. And so all of these choices are deliberate. They might not really think of it that way because these people have been drawing forever. And so for them, they might just be doing out of impulse. This might just be how they draw, right? They might just always draw the eyes over the hair no matter what the face looks like. Same thing with the eyebrows here. See, the eyebrows are the same color as the hair, and they just go, it's all on the same plane. This artist might just do it that way. However, it could also just be a choice on their part. Same thing with anything. I mean, you know what I mean? If we go to any of these, like, what's a good one? If we go to this one, what goes into this picture? Well, you've got that noticeable mole there, and you can look at, let's say this time we want to look at shading, right? Let's deconstruct shading. You know what I mean? And this is what you have to do. And this is what I've done in general in terms of my learning, is whenever I'm consuming media, I'm looking at these nuances to better understand my art. But it's also nice when you're just like confused. So you might be like, I don't know how I should go about shading, right? Like, I don't know where my shading should be, what makes sense, what looks good. Just use this. Deconstruct pictures like this. You go, okay, why are they shading the way they do? Well, they're shading down here because the clothes are three-dimensional and you know it's draping over. So all of this is going to be dark. You know her neck is dark here because of her chin, and you could tell it's almost exact. So because she has a pointed chin, down here is going to be more curled, right? It's not an exact replication. It doesn't have to be, because no one's going to be studying it this close except for you as an artist. So then you go, okay, well, why is this right here? Well, because it's a crease, right? Because as you can see on this side, it's a deliberate crease in her shirt. So you go, okay, well, then shadow has to be here because this is going to be tucked in between this fabric and the collar. So then you go, okay, well, why is light coming from the left and right? And you go, well, that's just a stylistic choice. Because if anything, this illustrates that the light is coming from behind her. which can just be illustrated by the background the way it is, but also because right here, because there's no real light source and because it's kind of ambiguous, it doesn't really matter. Instead, what you want to illustrate with this shading, or what I think they're trying to illustrate, is just the three-dimensional nature of this being. Because if you don't do this shading, this character probably looks awful. You know what I mean? Looks very flat, looks very unappealing, whatever. But when you add the shading here, it makes it obvious that it's like a three-dimensional, you know what I mean? You can almost imagine her face coming behind. You can almost imagine her shoulders here, whatever. And so, yeah. In this situation, when the lighting's like ambiguous, it's more important to make it obvious that this is three-dimensional, right? This shading right here is here's the light up top and it kind of gets darker on the insides here. These shadows on the face are kind of weird, right? Like right here makes sense, but then up here, like why is this here? Why is that there? Well, it just illustrates that like shading, and it illustrates that three-dimensional nature. Continue going down, you can look at other things too. You know what I mean? You can look at other people's fan art. So I don't know who this is, unfortunately, and I feel bad. But just if you look at it and you go, okay, so how do I explain this, right? How do I get into understanding this piece? You can look at it and you can say, okay, so look at the lines of it, right? And this is a little small, so I don't really like it, so I'll do it like this. You know what I mean? Look at how the hair is. This hair goes over the eyes, right? What does that do for the face? What does the color of the face do, right? Like, you could look at the rich colors, and you could say this color palette adds a lot to the characters. Their eyes are red, such as, obviously, in the anime, as we see that her eyes are red, and she has a very red aesthetic. But what does that do for everything else? Well, now you add a much harsher pink than what you would normally add in the face, and it makes her face come alive. And obviously this is just very quick analysis and doesn't really do much overall, but it gives the example of kind of what I'm trying to illustrate here. Same thing with this, right? Like, you could look at anything here. You could look at the shading, you could look at the hair, you could look at everything. But Deacon, look at, perfect example, look at this right here. This is a slight thing that you might not notice if you just watch this anime, but this is a deliberate choice that adds depth to this character. This nose is a single line. It's a single line. There is nothing else in this nose, right? You look at this and it's just that single line. But because she has the eye patch, and because you put the eye patch in this motion, it gives this depth, right? So now you know this nose comes out. It has to, because this is forming around the arch of the nose. So that's another example, again, this style, where it's using the environment to have a more simple approach. Its nose is a single line, but it doesn't have to be intricate because it's making it obvious that it's three-dimensional. Now you could change to something like Jotaro, right? Look at like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and look at their art style. Look how specific it is, right? The nose is clear, the lines are defined. Look at the shading, look at why they're doing the shading. It's to create a very brash, a very strong, a very rigid feel, right? Look at this face. It's literally just shapes. This is literally just a shape right here. It almost looks flat, but it becomes this almost, it's just this very cartoony feel to it, right? The nose here, look at it. It's literally, all of this is shapes. Like, here's a cylinder, like, right? Here's a cylinder. Here is a, like, rhombus, whatever, etc., etc. So, again, art style is important. If you wanted to do this kind of style, you need to understand why they're using this very almost manga style in terms of their animation. Look at the lines. They have the lines down as if like in a manga, right? If you look at like any manga, those lines are super common in some choices. And so understanding all this is super important to learning in general, right? Deconstructing is so helpful in anything you do, whether it be a language, but more specifically with drawing. It's important, and it helps you as a person understand what you're learning. And there's so many more aspects to this. You could ask a million questions. What time of day do you learn best? How do you learn best? What do you wear when you learn best? It's a rabbit hole, obviously. But the point is, you can ask yourself a million questions and every single one of them can help you learn better. But you need to learn how to learn before you can get to drawing. So I don't even need this because I've literally done it the whole time. But learning alone is helpful, right? We learn all the time. We watch videos, we listen to lectures, whatever. But learning how to learn is absolutely fundamental. Because when you learn how to learn, then you can accelerate your learning in such a way that you can grow exponentially in very little time. So again, I mean, obviously, I say this more to just illustrate it and not as a gloating kind, because again, I have my own problems with it in general. But a good example is like what I did in this was like a month apart, a little less than a month apart, I believe. Just look at the difference. It's not massive, right? Like, my drawing is still not perfect, but the point is I was able to fundamentally learn quicker because I understood how I learned best. I understood what it took for me to understand a concept. And for me, that's experimentation. So for me, it was doing entire 2500 by 2500 pixel 2500 by 2500 pixel drawings of literally nothing but let me pull it up. Like doing literally nothing but line work. So here's a good example of that, where I literally filled this entire thing. I just did line work, right? I did different types. I tried to understand how to do it, because this is how I learn best, right? And it becomes a jumbled mess because at some point it doesn't matter what it looks like, it matters what I get from it. But the point is that that's fine. Same thing I was doing here, right? Like I was literally just drawing lines. And then you look at stuff like this, right? Like my primitive sketches, right? Like I was trying to draw fingers here. They look awful. They look really bad. But then I was like, okay, so this wasn't helping me. So I was like, let's deconstruct it. What goes into a finger, right? What goes into a hand? If we go to my shading drills, like I tried different styles. What looks good? What doesn't look good, right? So at some point you need to stop thinking that looking at YouTube tutorials is going to help you learn your skill as fast as possible. They can help. I watch videos all the time about how to shade, how to color, what's color theory, etc. because they're helpful. They're genuinely helpful. However, if you over rely on them, if you sit there and say, look, I am just going to look at these YouTube tutorials, I'm going to copy them to the bone, you're not going to learn, because you don't know what you need to learn. You don't know how to learn. You know what learning is, but you don't know how you learn. What is going to be best for you to learn. And obviously that sounds really awkward, and obviously it's like, what the hell am I even talking about at some point? And I completely understand that, right? Like, what the hell does that mean? What does it mean to learn how to learn? It's a hard concept. But the point is understanding that these things are true, and understanding that you learn differently than someone else is crucial, because then it will help you further on. If you aren't a very visual learner, how is watching YouTube videos for hours on end going to help you learn? It's not. Instead, you should listen, or you should do a hands-on approach and be more direct with it. If you're bad with hands-on and you need to know everything before you start doing something, I don't highly recommend that. However, that some people genuinely learn that way. I know people who genuinely cannot learn by being hands-on. They need to know everything before they start learning, or they need to know everything before they start getting into learning. And so for those people, I'd be like, okay, watch YouTube videos, right? Literally sit there, watch YouTube videos for hours, and write down everything that you learned, and then try to apply it later. And it's the same thing with everything. like, what are your barriers, right? Like I said, I have bipolar and depression. So like for me, I sit there and I go, okay, so I have bipolar and depression. Why would I force myself to do something when I know my depression is going to make me feel worse? Or rather, I need to think about how my mental health will impact my learning. If I'm tired because I spent the whole last night forcing myself to stay up, I'm not going to learn anything well, and I need to understand I might need to take a break. So I think all of this is important. And there's a million more things you could talk about. But I think if you understand these basics, you can at least get off your feet in terms of learning. And I think at that point, it's definitely helpful. Because once you can get off your feet and better understand why you're doing the things you're doing or what you need to do, it's so much more helpful.